Hello. Today we're going to explore how trust can build better third spaces. Third spaces refers to locations where people spend time that is not their home, which is the first space, or work, the second space. Third spaces invite us to engage in activities outside of our usual home and work routines. Third spaces bring us into close proximity with people who we may not meet otherwise. And the best third spaces are conveniently located, easily accessible for long hours, accommodating for our needs, and often require no reservations. In third spaces, people express their natural selves, can exchange ideas, have a good time, build relationships, and develop a sense of community. Think about where you spent your time in the last week or two. Did you spend time in a coffee shop? Not just to grab and go, but to sit down and spend time in the space. Did you spend time in a park or open space? Or in a library? Not just to pick up books, but to spend time in the space. Did you spend time at a community centre? Or at a cultural centre, such as a gallery or museum? Or, over the last 2 weeks, at a public market? A wonderful example of a third space is your local public park. Nearly all parks are accessible 24 hours a day. You can find a diversity of people from your community who use the park for all sorts of activities, such as walking the dog, reading a book under a tree, doing exercise, meeting friends for a picnic. Parks often have resources such as pathways, barbecues, exercise equipment, drinking fountains, and toilets. And in today's overly surveilled world, having a security camera or a sign that informs people that the park is being monitored, or the occasional security team dropping by, helps people to feel safe in the public space. Public events, such as music festivals and community open days, are sometimes held in parks, which activates the space and brings together the community. Note that parks facilitate a high level of social trust in the community. Community centres are considered a good third space too. Compared to parks, community centres also have infrastructure that protect people from the weather, often providing meeting rooms and dance halls, and some have commercial kitchens. Have a look at the image. You can see our diverse community waiting to access the community centre. Unfortunately, community centres have barriers that reduce potential for becoming a great third space. For example, community centres are promoted as such. Therefore, people who do not consider their activities community-orientated, such as friends wanting a place to collaborate on a new business idea, may not consider meeting at the community centre. Community centres are not often accessible 24 hours. Therefore, some people miss out. Online and digital booking systems are increasingly common. Therefore, people in the community with lower digital literacy or who are intimidated by unintuitive booking systems are unable to book and also miss out. First-time users may be required to attend an induction session so that the steward of the community centre can meet and assess the applicant, and the applicant can check if the community centre suits their purpose. For some people, inductions may not be scheduled at useful times. Costs to hire or use the community centre may be prohibitive to some people, especially those in our communities who are considered low income, and who may benefit from accessing the community centre. People who want to use the community centre may require public liability insurance, which some people may not understand or may not be able to afford. Bookings also segregate people. For example, seniors might book the centre to play mahjong, which means that youth who play music or mums and bubs who socialise cannot book at the same time, which reduces the ability for the diverse community to interact. Community centres have events, such as open days, to activate the space and bring the community together. Unfortunately, after the excitement of the event, barriers still exist, and less people can engage. Community centres exhibit lower trust than parks. This is because trust and risk are intertwined. An increased perception of risk, for example the possibility of a window being broken in a community centre, often results in lower levels of trust. Barriers are introduced by the steward to reduce and mitigate perceived risk, and less people can access the third space, which is a shame. Let's have a look at library makerspaces. These spaces have the potential to be amazing third spaces. Makerspaces contain resources that help people produce new value through creativity and collaboration. Unfortunately, makerspaces are places of perceived risk. In the image, you can see our diverse community enthusiastically waiting to use the library's makerspace. Makerspaces are often considered places for nerds to tinker with technology. Therefore, some people in the community, for example, people who may be interested in developing social enterprise, do not consider the library makerspace as a suitable space for their projects. Library makerspaces are often only open during library hours, at times that some people, such as those with families and full-time work, are not available, therefore cannot use the space. Booking systems are online and digital, meaning people with poor digital literacy or unable to access the internet are unable to book, and inductions can sound intimidating or only happen during scheduled times when people may not be available. Costs may be included to access the makerspace, to attend programs, or to purchase consumables like 3D printing filament, which may be prohibitive for some people. Like community centres, library makerspaces segregate people. The makerspace is only available to those who have booked the particular space or resource at a particular time. Others have to wait until their scheduled time, therefore, less chance of diverse people meeting each other. Libraries often require the supervision of customers using particular resources in the makerspace considered to be high risk, like laser cutters. If library staff are not available, the resource often becomes unavailable. Libraries do provide open days and come and try days to activate their makerspaces and encourage engagement. Unfortunately, after the excitement is generated, the community still face the same barriers. For example, a young man wanted to pursue his newfound enthusiasm for leather making and saw that his local library makerspace had useful resources. The library informed his parents that they would have to wait a month until the next scheduled induction, then up to another month for approval before accessing the space. The family could see that the makerspace was rarely used, and frustrated how difficult it was to access the publicly funded resource. As a result, you end up with Steve, middle class, who drops into the library's makerspace on Saturday mornings to tinker on projects. Steve has navigated the barriers and is considered trustworthy, therefore can access the space, although he may not be able to use resources that he has not yet been inducted on, or that require library supervision, as library staff are not available on Saturdays due to staffing costs. An interesting observation is that a 3D printer is a public asset that, with the push of a button, heats up an element to produce an outcome, such as a new toy or new frames for your glasses. A barbecue in a park is a public asset that, with the push of a button, heats up an element to produce an outcome, such as cooked food. Anyone, such as a 5-year-old, can access a public barbecue in a public park at any time, but it is much harder for the community to access a 3D printer in a public library. In 2021, we integrated the social trust of public parks into a library makerspace. Much like a park, the Open Lab was a public space that was free to use, accessible all hours, self-serve, meaning no supervision required, and perpetually co-designed. Perpetually co-designed means that everyone who used the Open Lab had an opportunity to suggest and could vote on what resources would be most useful for projects each financial quarter. An example of participatory design. Suggestions for resources would include technology such as VR headsets, 3D scanners, and green screens. But voting would reveal resources such as a whiteboard for people to share ideas and a mirror so people could see themselves before going on camera made the top of the list and acquired first. Including the community in the design of the Open Lab also meant that every resource had purpose, and every resource was always used and appreciated. A culture book was developed for the Open Lab that prioritized inclusivity, creativity, community, and safety, and every new participant inherited the Open Lab's fundamental culture. To describe the space, people would add the word studio to a variation of interpretations, depending on their intrinsic motivation. For example, business studio, creative studio, digital studio, fabrication studio, and library studio were common. Therefore, rather than being branded as a makerspace, innovation center, or creative hub, the Open Lab was known as a place you could go to pursue ideas and solve problems. Social events would encourage the creative community to meet each other, share their projects and ideas. followed up by design thinking workshops and collaborations to continue the energy generated at the social events. People bartered for skills and knowledge. If you were inspired by someone who made great video content, you could offer chocolate, coffee, or a good dad joke in exchange for a mentoring session in the Open Lab. Relationships and business ideas that form through the mentor bartering system in the lab would lead to paid work outside of the lab, contributing to the community's economic development. To counter segregation, we would strategically invite people to double book and share the space with others. 100% of the time, people said yes. Different resources could be used simultaneously by different people, or projects with mutual outcomes could be done collaboratively. Public access to expensive resources meant that the Open Lab had a perceived high risk, yet operated with a high level of social trust. As a result, in 2021, the Open Lab was booked more than 1,000 times, often up to 90 hours per week. 150 diverse citizens from community, industry, and government were inducted. People who were included had the autonomy to invite non-inducted people into the Open Lab to help do their projects. Inducted people were trusted to be responsible for their non-inducted collaborators. Those who loved the experience would ask to be inducted too, and 560 citizens did more than 400 projects in the lab within 12 months, producing social, economic, and ecological outcomes. A total of 150 resources were added and used often. In 2021, no resources were broken or missing, and all were kept in great working condition by Open Lab participants. This is most likely because of the culture of ownership, responsibility, and community that evolved in the lab. People knew that if they looked after the resources, they could continue to come back and work on their projects. Many wonderful stories emerged from the lab, including 2 senior ladies whose struggle with dementia caused loneliness and social isolation. They had the idea to collaborate and create a podcast documenting their experience. Soon, they had 17,000 unique listeners, including industry guests from around the world, presented to Parliament, published books, were invited to become international ambassadors, and won a scholarship. Most importantly, they did not feel lonely or isolated. Youth who had been committing crime discovered the Open Lab and expressed challenges occurring in their lives through the intrinsic creation of a collaborative music project dubbed Hip Hop Therapy. Time was invested towards producing music both at the lab and at each other's homes, rather than in criminal activity. An excerpt of Kids' Show and global phenomenon Bluey was recorded in the lab. Live collaborations between Townsville musicians and Nashville music producers occurred in the lab also, and many more interesting projects. In 2022, the Open Lab was inherited by traditionally minded library staff and began to transition towards a standard library makerspace. Hopefully, the public library incorporates learnings from the Open Lab, or other organizations become inspired to produce similar third spaces for trusted place-based collaboration in their communities. In conclusion, trust plays a vital role in developing better third spaces. Third spaces, such as public parks, community centres and libraries, where people can gather and not be expected to buy anything, provide citizens with opportunities for collaborative city making, enabling them to meet, share ideas, solve problems and innovate, create and collaborate for the city's benefit. Usually operated by local government, access to these third spaces can be influenced by perceived risk, with parks and open spaces seen as low risk and easily accessible, while makerspaces in libraries are considered higher risk due to potential injuries, damage or theft, leading to increased access control and reduced accessibility. Trust and risk are intrinsically linked, as trusted individuals are granted greater access to resources. Therefore, increasing trust among stakeholders involved in third spaces with valuable resources is crucial, especially considering the diversity of people who live in the city. Participatory design involving all stakeholders can foster a sense of ownership, responsibility, and accountability, which builds relationships, trust, and ultimately reduces risk and enhances accessibility. An increase in trust results in more participation and more resources, which produces more value, greater impact, and improves social, economic, and ecological outcomes for our communities. Therefore, I encourage you to explore third spaces in your local community and increase trust to build better third spaces.